Hello and welcome to the Unstoppable Indians. Every week we take a journey into the life of an outstanding Indian, a person whose talent, acumen or moral example is transforming India. The best, the finest from every field join me, Manvi Dhillon, on this show to share their life story, their journey to success, some of the knocks along the way, what made them get up and keep going, what makes them an unstoppable Indian. My guest today has been making films for over 35 years. The themes he chooses are from everyday life, but they strike a powerful chord. The script, the direction, the cinematic talent is mesmerizing. I'm very pleased to introduce Shyam Benegal. Thank you very much for joining me on the Unstoppable Indians. 35 years making films. I'm sure each film you give your heart and soul to it. What is the secret reservoir of inspiration?
Well, you know, each film is actually a kind of adventure. That's one of the things. What makes you keep going is because it's always a process of discovery. It's a journey, you know. It's a journey into an experience, a one or another kind of experience. And all those experiences are exciting. And filmmaking, therefore, is this exciting journey and a process of discovery. So once you've finished shooting a film, there's also an incredible sense of loss until you start another film.
I'm sure.
And that process keeps going on. I mean, it's quite endless, really, because I don't believe I've come to a point where I say enough is enough, you know. Because you really are dealing with life, that's what it is. And because you're dealing with life, it can, I mean...
There is so much in life
so much
that
in
one
life
could cover.
that, yeah, there's nothing, there's no end to that.
But the moment you say it's a Shyam Benegal film, one thinks of a socially meaningful film. Is that something that you've consciously decided upon early on in your career? In a sense, is it a motto by which you live, that it must be meaningful?
Not really. Not at all, as a matter of fact. You see, the idea that it has to do with your own interests. If you have interests and you have concerns, all human beings do. When you have a certain kind of interest, and my interest largely is social, you know, in the society around me. It has to do with society close to me, the larger society, even the largest possible society. But essentially, the interest and concern is societal. And because of that, many things come into it. You know, people come into it, human beings come into it, all the problems, political things come into it, you know, economics comes into it, anthropology comes into it. You know, there's nothing that won't come into it. Because if you keep your eyes and ears open to what's going on around you, obviously there are many things there that concern you. There are some things that don't concern you, but a large number of things actually concern you. In the case of most human beings, they do concern you. You can shut them off. That's a different matter. But I prefer not to shut them off.
But the tone is serious. Does that make you a serious person?
I would not at all. I mean, the problems may be serious, but you know, there's so many different ways of looking at it. I don't believe that I look at these things in a way that is either pessimistic or in any way dark, you know, because I don't think I'm that kind of a person. I cannot say things to an audience that says there's no hope. Who am I to say that? You know, when you say so-and-so is pessimistic, well, you can be pessimistic about yourself, but how can you say you're pessimistic about life?
And to society at large.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's totally absurd, you know. So that's one of the things. I mean, of course, you're serious, but I've made comedies. My present film, which
is
is
of course Welcome to Sajjanpur is a
Yes.
comedy.
Yeah.
Is it tough to get into a comedy mode or not really?
Not at all, except that it's difficult to make comedy. It's difficult to make comedy that makes people laugh, but it's not just a question of making people laugh, but it also, at the end of it, it must also leave something behind, some little thought, something. So, because the best comedies are of those kinds. The best comedy ever, if you look at, the Chaplin was probably the finest comic actor and probably made the best comedies the world has ever known. Look at all his films. You will find that you're laughing, but there's also something that moves you there, something that points to the human condition. And that's very important, because without that, what does it mean? Without that, you're just laughing at other people.
Right. The protagonist in this case is the letter writer, and I'm sitting across to you, a person who probably wrote a letter 15 years ago, because it's all about email and SMSs and mobiles. It's set in rural India. Again, did you say, well, you know what, I'm going to make a point here. I'm going to set this comedy in rural India. I'm going to have the protagonist a letter writer. Was there a point you're making, or it just all naturally fell into place?
Well, it naturally fell into place, but of course I must say that I am concerned about a few things of life in urban India today. There's a tendency, particularly in high metropolitan India and class 1 cities and so on and so forth, to imagine that there is no world beyond them. They can't see that more than 50% of them, of us, are living in village India. And why must it simply fall off the map? If you look at Indian films, say 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you will find that there's always a mix.
And today it's so urban-centric.
It's all gone, as though the village experience is simply of no consequence.
I want to go back a bit to the beginning, actually. You were born in Hyderabad?
Yes.
What were those early years like?
Well, I just loved it there that time. Hyderabad in those days happened to be very feudal, of course. But it was a wonderful place in the sense that, you see, one of the things that I count myself as among the lucky ones, where one experienced in many ways medieval India, and modern India, all at the same time. Because Hyderabad was an old feudal state. Nothing really had changed. It was almost like you had moved back into the 16th or 17th century.
Absolutely.
On one level. And on the other, instantly there was a sense of the modern. Because where I grew up actually in a cantonment town. A little cantonment town in the heart of Hyderabad. So you had different kinds of experiences. And of course it was also colonial at that time. So, but of course it all changed in a few years, but whatever that was, but to start off with, this to me was a very important experience. And that experience, and because one started to see change in a way that today you only see everything in terms of technological change. If you're sitting in urban India, you are seeing everything through the filter of technological change. But it was different because, things are changing. Society is changing.
And what a journey you have seen.
It's wonderful, isn't it? It's extraordinary.
But I'm curious to know, when did that interest or that desire to explore a future in film, when did the seed for that get sown?
Well, that was largely because I think I discovered the cinema, and fortunately I discovered the cinema because my father, who was a still photographer, happened to be an kind of home movies freak. He had a little 16mm movie camera and he made movies, meaning he shot films which he put together, his children, He had quite a number of them, so the films every year or two about his numerous children, which was part of our entertainment as children. And also it was kind of after dinner entertainment, so it was that was one part of it. And the other thing was that we had a cinema very close to our home, which happened to be the Garrison Cinema. Garrison cinemas in those days, the army cantonments, they used to have their own cinemas for the troops. And this used to have 3 changes a week. There would be a North Indian film, there would be a South Indian film, and there would also be a foreign film. So you had 3 changes a week in a given week. And
you saw all of them?
I would see all of them, obviously. So that really got me hooked. And there's a reason why I got hooked, because you see, cinema seems to be the only thing that truly transported you into another world. And that is a world that there's a promise that you can create this world. You can create the world of that cinema. So you can create your own world. And when you're children, you're constantly doing that. So creating your own little worlds. And that grew into a kind of passion as I was starting to grow up. And clearly, this was what I wanted to do. Create world upon world through different films.
The early films, and I want to ask about Manthan in particular. Correct me if I've got any of the facts wrong, but you collected 2 rupees from 500,000 dairy farmers to finance the film?
Yeah, that was Manthan, yes, Manthan, but then Manthan was something that was possible only because of Dr. Kurian, who was the true pioneer of the milk cooperative movement in this country. I mean, without him, we wouldn't be the world leaders in milk. It was I used to be in advertising, and when I was in advertising, one of the things that we used to have Gujarat Cooperative Marketing Federation, Amul, as one of our clients. And I'd made a couple of documentaries for them, particularly when the National Dairy Development Board was formed, and Dr. Kurian had instituted something called Operation Flood, to start cooperatives all over the country. And there were two. There was Operation Flood 1 and Operation Flood 2, 2 phases of them. And I'd made documentaries during both those phases. And there were so many wonderful stories, wonderful human stories. So I once mentioned this to Dr. Kurian. I said, we make these documentaries. Documentaries really go to people who are already converted. It's always like that, tragically. It's much better to make a fiction film, to do something, drama, which you can show in a regular cinema hall. And then you also introduce the subject, apart from everything else, in a way that is
accessible.
They can participate and
yes.
They can identify with, and so on and so forth. So he agreed, but there was no money. So it was his idea that if all the members of the cooperative at that time would contribute a small sum of money, we could actually make this picture. And they would become the producers, which in fact what happened. And it was in that sense quite unique. Although such examples are there, a couple of other examples like this have happened in other parts of the world, but never in our country. So this was the very first time something like this happened, and one didn't imagine that it would be as successful as it was. Yeah.
Tell me, those early films like Manthan, Ankur, Nishant, do they have a special place in your life?
All of them have a special place, because every film that you make, there's a bit of your life there. You've spent time with it. So they all belong to different stages in your own life. And your life is connected to each one of those films in so many different ways. the experience is connected with making the film, than to see the film itself and its own life, you know. Because I'm a great believer, once you make a film, you must cut the umbilical cord and let it have a life of its own, not any longer connected with yourself, you know. It's very important to do that. At least for me, it's very important to do that. So I see all that with slightly distanced. But when I think about all of that, it's a kind of the different phases my own life has gone through, you know, has been through, which I find, I don't do it very often because I don't sit back and start to think about my past. Only on occasions like this, when somebody asks me about it, but not otherwise, yeah.
But tell me, do you ever feel completely satisfied, completely happy, like a sense of utter 100% well-being and satisfaction after a film is made? Or is there always that little thought that...
I never feel satisfied. It's very difficult. Because, you know, you always at the end of it, you say, oh, why did I allow that to happen? Or why did I take that decision that changed that little thing around, you know? I wish I could have done that better at that point in time. You know, those things are always there. But then I don't think about it anymore. You know, once you made your film, and that's it.
And the cord is cut, and then it's...
That's it. And then you go on to the next one, because you cannot sit there with things like this, because postmortems are all right for the future, but not for itself. You know, not oh, I could have done that. But it was done. I mean, what can you do about it? Once it's done, it's done.
Tell me, has directing gotten easier with time?
For me, every time I start making a film, it's like my first film. And when I finish a film, I sometimes wonder, is that going to be my last film? You know, you always worry about these things. You know, it's always like that. When you start a film, it's always your first film. The excitement, the anticipation, all of that is no different from the time one made my first film.
Your first film.
But the day I finish that film, you sit there and say, I hope this is not my last film.
I'm intrigued by something you said recently, that it's easier to make films today, but it's more tough to make them the way you want to make them.
You know, that has always been the case. That has always been the case. In different ways. Circumstances are different. There used to be different circumstances at one time. Now it's another set of circumstances. When I started making films, it really was much more difficult in terms of getting money to make films like this. Also because the nature of the business was such that to make a film that was slightly different and not altogether part of the way mainstream films are made, both in terms of content and style, it was more difficult then. But today what has happened is, although that has become a little easier, there are other problems. You know, because what happens when you're making a film is that there are so many commercial considerations which you cannot avoid. How can you avoid it? Films cost a lot of money. And they have to not only cover costs, they have to make a profit. And in the old days, individuals would make the money. Today, shareholders make the money. So it's that concern, even if you say, I don't care about it, it's just a fake kind of bravado, not real, you know, because every filmmaker knows that he has to concern himself with these
Have you been
problems.
adaptable in this whole journey?
I have had one great advantage, that I've never had to compromise on what I was doing. Meaning, you know, the subject that I wanted to deal with, the way I want to handle it, that nobody has interfered with my work. They may say, like, maybe you should take a star here, you must do this, you must do that, prop it up so that, you know, you have an easier way into the market. No, those things I can understand. Not only will I understand, I will also attempt to meet those considerations because I know it's important. No point in arguing about that. But the important thing is you want to make the film that you have in mind. And you don't want anybody to interfere with that aspect.
And that integrity hasn't been compromised in your case?
That I've never had to compromise on. And to me, that has been the most important thing, for which I feel, I really feel that I've been lucky, that I haven't had to do that. But then, there is a reason for that also. I mean, I might sound very arrogant, but the truth is that if you know what you're doing, people will not interfere with you.
The future. It seems like a busy one because there's Chamki Chameli, there's Spy Princess based on the life of Noor Inayat, there's Buddha. Are all of these occupying your mind space right now, or is it one first and...
Yeah, obviously, one after the other. But then, when you're working on scripts and getting people to write scripts for you and you're having script meetings and participating in that process, then of course you can multitask. But when you're actually making a film, you can't do that, or at least I can't do that. Some people do that. So it has to be serially, you do one and then you get on with the other. Yes, it is very busy, but I enjoy it, I enjoy it because each is a different world. Each one of those subjects.
So different.
Totally different, one from the other. So it's very exciting moving from this world to that world to a third one and so on, which is something that I've always enjoyed. I've always enjoyed moving from one world to another world to a third one and so on, because there's never a dull moment.
Yeah. Well, on that note, Shyam Benegal, thank you so much for talking to me on The Unstoppable Indians. It has been indeed a great pleasure.
Thank you.